design.
This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is being streamed.
Okay. All right, hopefully we'll get that figured out. But go ahead, Jackie, do you mind advancing the slide, please? Okay, so step over here a little bit. So first of all, a lot of reasons why I hear people don't fill out an advance directive or don't have conversations with their family about end-of-life care is, oh, my daughter knows me, she'd know what I want. Or my husband, we've been married 50 years, he'd know what I want. But you know what? Most of the time they don't. Over 50% of the time, if you don't tell them what you want, it's either a guess or they're going to make decisions based on what they would personally want if they were in that situation. And so people can't read minds, even though they may have lived with you for 50 years or you raised them and they know you as an individual well, they may not know your end-of-life preferences well. So you don't want to assume that. And as you mentioned earlier, it helps align, if you do have conversations about what you want at the end of life, it helps align your care with your personal values, whether you value quality of life, whether you value autonomy and independent decision making. It helps ensure that your values and your preferences are met at end of life. So this is a win-win for the family and for the individual.
This meeting is being streamed.
Conversations. Avoid unnecessary interventions. So a lot of times if you're in the hospital, you don't have an advance directive, you're going to get every intervention possible if you are in a critical condition, unless you have something that specifies, I don't want a feeding tube, I don't want a ventilator. So you want to avoid unnecessary treatment if that's not what aligns with your preferences and values. And then lastly, you want to have these conversations with your family or your relatives or caregivers because it helps them. At the end of life, if they're in a stressful situation and they're wondering if mom would want a feeding tube and you can't have a conversation with mom, that's a lot of stress on your daughter or your spouse or a friend to make that kind of a decision without having a context or a discussion to go on. So having these conversations is a benefit for everybody and helps release feelings of guilt or burden long-term about, some people wonder, did I do the right thing? Is that what mom would have wanted or dad would have wanted? And you don't want to have your family members feeling that sort of guilt. So end-of-life conversations are very important. Now, how do you have them? That's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. Okay, any questions? Yeah?
When you're saying avoid unnecessary interventions, if I'm checked into the VA hospital, they're going to do everything to keep me going unless I've specified? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. So in your packet, there's an advanced directive, a Utah advanced directive form. And you can fill this out with your primary care provider and it can get put in your medical chart. And you can specify, like, I don't want CPR, I don't want to be on a ventilator, I don't want a feeding tube. But if you don't have that specified and you suddenly go unconscious or you're having some sort of healthcare crisis, they are legally obligated to do everything possible to keep you alive. So that's why it's important to have that in your medical record.
So if it's on file at the hospital, you're okay? They check that immediately?
Well, it's a good question. The question was, if it's on file at the hospital, you're okay. Well, if you're going to that specific hospital, you should be okay. The problem is if you get transferred, you're somewhere else, and you go to the ambulance takes you to the closest hospital, it's great to have your advanced directive form in a bright colored paper on your refrigerator so that the paramedics and EMT professionals know where to find that. So it's not foolproof. You want to make sure that your family has copies of it as well, because they're going to be the ones at the hospital sharing what your preferences are. So make sure they have copies too. But what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different. Yes, you're filling out your Utah Advanced Directive Form is very important. This is a legally binding document. But what I want to talk about today is how do you make end-of-life care plans if you have dementia, in the early stages of dementia, or maybe you just have a risk factor for dementia. People in your family have it, so there's a genetic risk. Maybe you're noticing some subtle memory problems. Maybe you're just concerned about what would happen if I get dementia. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Next slide. Okay, so most end-of-life planning guides or advanced directives, like we talked about, they are kind of vague. Again, your advanced directive, you're in the hospital, you're unconscious. It talks about a few bullet points of what you would want to do for medical interventions. They assess care preferences based on hypothetical untreatable disease. So it's if you're in a car accident and you're in the hospital, or you're just unconscious for whatever reason. But we know that the disease may make a difference, right? So if you guys think about, you don't have to say it out loud, but if I got XY disease, my end-of-life preferences would be different. Whether it's cancer or congestive heart failure or dementia. Maybe your end-of-life preferences would be different based on disease. And I excluded all the research behind this from this talk because I wanted to get to the meat of the hands-on application. But my colleagues and I at the U, we did several years of research where we asked people, would your end-of-life preferences differ hypothetically if you were diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, congestive heart failure, or Alzheimer's disease? That changed your preferences. And we found out indeed, if people had said in the case of dementia, that would be different. They would want less interventions. They would be okay not living at home. They would be okay not passing away at home. And so dementia is a unique disease because unlike some other chronic conditions, you lose your memory and thinking abilities, and you can't make these decisions for yourself. So that's what we found in our previous research. And so we said, okay, how can we help individuals and families have conversations about end-of-life care planning within the context of dementia? So just a quick overview in case some of you aren't really familiar with dementia. Dementia is a condition where you lose your cognitive skills or your thinking skills, like your memory, your language skills, your visual spatial skills. You lose that slowly over time to get to the point where you're not able to make important decisions about your life. You can't make decisions about medical interventions or about where you want your care to take place. And then your family needs to make those decisions. But you're not unconscious in a hospital. You're still walking around, you're talking, you're fine, but you can't participate in decision making. And so we wanted families to talk about this early in the process. So, hey mom, you just got unfortunately diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Tell me what you want now for your care, and what would you want 2 years from now when you may not know who I am, or you may not be able to make these decisions. Because those preferences might differ over time, right? And so that's why we came up with this guide. Can you advance the slide, please, Jackie? So we came up with this guide. It's in your packet here. It's called the LEAD Guide. It stands for Life Planning in Early Alzheimer's and Dementia. So it's not just for Alzheimer's disease. That's one type of dementia, but there's many types of dementia. Vascular dementia, or frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body, if you've got traumatic brain injury, anything that would affect your cognitive abilities. And so we wanted to put this together so it gives families something to guide them through these hard conversations. These are not easy conversations, are they, to have with your family? So we put together this LEAD guide. Again, you can find it at www.utahgwep.org. You can download it. It's free. Share it with whoever you would like. And I'm going to kind of walk you through this, how you would use this with your family or your friends or with residents. So part one, we're going to talk about ways to use the LEAD guide. Then we're going to talk about how the LEAD guide helps with end-of-life planning. Then part one of the guide talks about end-of-life documentation, like advanced directives. Part two is going to talk about an individual's values. And part three talks about their preferences for care. And it's important to have both of those because situations come up that are not black and white, and you have to make difficult decisions. But if you know mom's value is quality of life, and you know the medical team wants to do an intervention that may not lead to a great quality of life, then that helps you make your decision. And then There is a glossary at the end as well, because some of this medical terminology is tricky and not familiar to everyone. And then there's some blank pages just to add additional information. So we're going to walk through this. So again, stop me as we walk through and ask questions. Okay, so let's go to the first section. Jackie, can you advance, please? Okay, so these are the ways that you can use this lead guide. You can use it by yourself. If some people aren't comfortable having the conversation. I highly recommend having conversations with family members. But if that's not an option, it's better to at least have something written down than nothing at all. But if you do complete this by yourself, a piece of paper, even an advanced, directive, it's not really useful unless you share it with someone, right? Those people who are going to make decisions for you. Excuse you. So even if you complete the lead guide by yourself, make sure you give copies to your healthcare power attorney, your family members, so that they know what your preferences are. So 2, you can use it with the person you've named with your medical power of attorney. That's the person who legally is designated to make decisions on your behalf. It's very important that they have this information so they can make the right decisions, right? So you want to use it with them. You can also have, number 3 here, have a more general conversation with any of your family or friends so that people that you care about know what you'd want done if you were to get to dementia and have dementia progress. And number 4, you can use it with your doctor to help him or her understand your preferences as well. You can fill this out at home, bring it in, give it to your primary care doctor. They can even enter it in your file along with your advance directive to give greater context to your care preferences. So it's important to note, though, unlike the Utah Advance Directive form, this is legally binding. This lead guide is not. This is just meant to serve as a template for you to have these difficult conversations and document your values and preferences. So keep that in mind. Jackie, next slide. Okay. So this next slide gives a little bit of background about the lead guide. Again, it's designed, although this can be used by anyone, just healthy adults who may be concerned about getting dementia, because you never know if that's going to happen. It helps you specify with whom you want to make your decisions about your care, your wishes for your preferences and values if you have a cognitive impairment that prevents you from making your own decisions. Okay. So the lead guide is a set of questions that helps you prepare for your future healthcare needs. It helps you review what you've done so far about end-of-life care planning, like naming a medical power attorney or saying, Johnny, you're my oldest son, I want you to make the decisions, and filling out advanced care directive documents. So we do have a community-based group of some couples from the community who completed our lead guide and gave us feedback. And one of the things that was really rewarding is that one gentleman was like, hey, I'm 72 years old and I haven't even thought about end-of-life planning, or I don't have an advance directive, I don't have a medical power of attorney. So I got him at least thinking about what steps he needs to do next. So that's why this guide is helpful. Number 2, it helps you share your values about how you see the end of your life. For example, if you develop dementia, do you prefer to live longer, or would you rather focus on having more of a quality, higher quality of life, but a shorter life? Those are important things to discuss with your family and just to reflect on as an individual. These are things we don't think about on a day-to-day basis. Talking about dying and mortality is not a fun, happy topic at the Thanksgiving table, but having this guide kind of forces you to think about these tough issues. And number 3, it helps you share your preference for your care. For example, where you wish to live and who will care for you. So I don't know if any of you have situations like this, but I hear commonly, like, I wish I knew if mom would be okay if I had to bring in someone else to care for her in the home, some home health care, or if mom would be okay with transferring her to a long-term care facility. Those questions that you can't answer when someone's dementia has progressed too long. And so it's important to have these conversations early. That's key. All right, Jackie. Okay, so part one of the guide here on page 2, this just talks about end-of-life documentation. So do you have a living will or an advance directive, which is a legal written document that states the kind of medical care you want if you can't speak for yourself. So do you have that? Do you have a do not resuscitate order, sometimes called referred to as a DNR, where if your heart stopped, you don't want to be resuscitated? And you have a medical power of attorney. And if you do, who is that person? So this is all good information to have documented. And this can be, you don't fill it out just once. Maybe you fill it out once and you don't have an advance directive or you don't have a power of attorney. And you get that set up and you go back and you update this form with that information. So this can be revisited and updated as often as you'd like.
Where do you keep that form?
Where do you keep it? That's a great question. So any of your pertinent medical information, you want to make sure you have a copy somewhere that you can find it and that your family or whoever is making those medical decisions for you, they have a copy somewhere where they can grab it quick in the case of an emergency. A lot of times on the refrigerator, or there's a special folder in a drawer, but somewhere that you can get to it quickly. It's a good question. And then it has a spot where you can sign your name and the date, so if there are a couple versions, you know what's the most recent version. Mom completed this 5 times, her wishes changed, which one is the most recent? So just for documentation there. Next slide, Jackie. So then this next section, part 2, focuses on end-of-life values. So values are, these are generalized statements about your attitude towards end-of-life care. These values are unique to you as an individual. Everyone has different values, right? And they don't typically change too much. They're pretty static. And they serve as guideposts for your caregiver, family member, close friend to make decisions on your behalf. Okay, so this first part, we really heard a lot from our research participants. Remember those studies we did? A main concern people had was, I don't want to be a burden. You ever hear that before? Yeah, people are very concerned about being a burden, but burden is kind of a very broad concept. And so we wanted to divide that up a little bit, like what type of burden? So we asked people here on a scale of 1 to 5, their level of agreement with the statement. So 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. I'm concerned about being a financial burden to family or friends. And they can rate that, like how big of a concern is being a financial burden? I'm concerned about being an emotional burden to my family. What level do you agree with that? And I'm concerned about being a physical burden, like having my husband or daughter have to get me dressed and do bathing and all those day-to-day tasks. What type of burden are you concerned with? So that might help your family member make decisions about where you receive care. Like, mom's really concerned about being a burden, so that's a value to her. So that helps inform what type of care she gets long-term and where she receives that care. So that first value is burden. If you flip the page, there are some questions about quality of life versus length of life. And so again, on that same 1 to 5 scale, you can fill out how you rate quality of life versus length of life. So first question is, quality of life is more important than length of life. If you agree with that, you would check strongly agree. If you disagree, you check the other end or somewhere in between. Given the choice, I would prefer to live a shorter but more satisfying life. And maybe you have a conversation with that family member of what does that mean? What's a satisfying life to you? Have any of you read Atul Gawande's Being Mortal book? Yeah, it's a great book about end-of-life care. And one thing that struck me is he asked his dad, what is quality of life to you? And he said, I want to be able on Sunday afternoon to watch a football game and eat ice cream. That was his quality of life. And he said, if I don't have that, then I'm okay passing on. But ask your family members, ask yourself, how do you define quality of life? That helps your family members, again, make decisions in greater context. And another question, I would prefer to live as long as I can, even if that longer life is not of the highest quality. So your value is living as long as you can, even if you have to sacrifice some of that quality. That's important for your family to know. Decision making on page 5, that's the next value we're talking about. Some people, maybe think about yourself. Do you want to make all the decisions yourself? Or some people say, I don't want to make any decisions. I want my family to make decisions for me, or my doctor. Or maybe I want a little bit of both. I want to be involved with my family and my doctor making decisions together. And so these questions ask about, okay, your end-of-life decisions. Who do you want to make those decisions? You can check. Just me, I'm making all those decisions. Or, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I want my family or doctor to make those decisions. Or somewhere in between. Then there's a question about decisions related to location of ongoing care. So with dementia, people lose functional abilities over time. So they lose the ability to get dressed and to bathe themselves and walk eventually. And who's going to provide that care? And who's going to make that decision? Now, do you want to make that decision? Do you want your family again or your doctor, or make it collaborative? So you can indicate that here on page 5. And the same thing with decision making as far as on page 6 here, your location of death. This is something some people don't think about, but it's important to let your family know. Do you want to possible die at home? Are you okay passing away in a hospital? Would you like to be in hospice care? Are you okay passing away if you're in a residential or long-term care facility? Is that okay with you? What's your preference? And who do you want to decide that? And then life-prolonging measures. So those are the things we talked about. Life-prolonging measures are medical interventions like a feeding tube, being on a ventilator, and having CPR, things that are going to prolong your life. Who do you want to make those decisions? Okay, and then on page 7, there are decisions about controlling the timing of someone's death or passing. And do you want to be in charge of that? You want your family, again, or your doctor, or a combination of all of that? Who do you want to make those decisions? And then there's a blank space here, because again, these are check boxes and scales, but that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So maybe you want to add information about values of, I really don't want to be a burden to my family. Please make decisions that make your life as easy as possible. I will be okay with that. Or just add whatever extra information that you want there. Like my quality of life is watching football and eating ice cream, right? So just specifying that extra information. The more context that your loved ones have in making decisions for you, the easier it is to make those decisions. And the more likely it is that you're going to get the care that you want at the end of life. Okay, so the next section, part 3, starts on page 8. These are end-of-life care preferences. Jackie, go ahead and, oh, you're already there. So preferences they may change based on circumstance. And we've divided this section. So remember, this guide is for a dementia trajectory. So we've divided these questions into, what do you want now when you're in the early stages, or you don't even have dementia, you may just have some symptoms and you're concerned. What would you want now for your end-of-life preference when you have the ability to make decisions? And importantly, as a guide for family members, what do you want when you can no longer make those decisions and you can't tell me what you want? What do you want down the road? So this helps the caregiver feel comfortable about, okay, I know what mom wants now. I don't have to guess what mom would want when she can't communicate her preferences to me. So the first question here is, if you were to require 24-hour care for medical needs today, when you can make decisions, where do you want that to be? At home, at someone else's home, a residential hospice center, nursing home, hospital, you're not sure. Would this change if you can no longer make your own decisions? So when that dementia is advanced, would this preference for location of ongoing care, would that change? And if so, where would that change to? All of the information highlighted in red in the text, that's found in the glossary too. Life-prolonging measures. Okay, if you had to choose today when you can make decisions on your own, would you want to be on life support or a breathing machine? Would you want to live as long as possible even if your brain had stopped working? Would you want to live as long as possible if you had to be fed through a tube? Would you want to live as long as possible if you were in severe pain? That's a situation people don't always think about. Okay, so that's what you want today when you can tell me what you want. Now, again, 2 years down the road when your dementia is advanced, what would you want for those life-prolonging measures? Same thing? You want to be less aggressive with intervention? You want to be more aggressive? Like, how does that change? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But in our research, we found that people do, when they have to think about down the road when they can't make decisions, their preferences do change. So being able to communicate that with your family is important. And then controlling the timing of your death. There's some sensitive questions here. Would you consider ending your own life through not eating or drinking? Would you consider independently ending your own life or taking prescription medication? And this is good information so you can have interventions and share with your doctor and have those tough conversations about that. Then again, there's additional information. So what items about location of care or preferences did we not talk about in this guide that you want to share with your family? And then there's a box about just summarize. You have to summarize it and what are your values and preferences for your end-of-life care. And at the end, in the bottom of page 11, it does say, and again, I said you might want to revisit this over time, our preferences may change over time, our circumstances change, our diagnoses change, where we're living changes, and that impacts our end-of-life preferences. So this should be revisited regularly as health conditions or cognitive functions change. Information can be added to reflect your current end-of-life wishes, and consider sharing this with your doctor and friends and family. And as I said, filling out any sort of paperwork about your end-of-life preferences isn't very useful unless you share it. It's really important to share it with your healthcare provider, friends, family, medical power of attorney. So the glossary here, this just goes over some of the technical language in here. We tried to make this as low of a reading level as possible. It's an 11th grade reading level, but some medical terminology like do not resuscitate order. Can't really simplify that. But we do have definitions in the back here for those terms. And then you can see at the very end, there's a few pages, and of course, you can add to this. You can type things on a computer, but we added some, excuse me, some blank pages here about adding additional information. Because again, checkboxes are great. That gives you some solid data to work with, but you need more context for end-of-life care planning. So on page 14, you'll see after completing this guide, some people think of more details they want to document regarding their end-of-life care. So again, how do you define quality of life? And you can add information here from our community advisory group. This one woman wrote up a whole 2-page supplement to this about if I don't recognize you, then I want X, Y, Z. Or if I can no longer dress myself, then I want this. And she kind of put in her own milestones along the dementia trajectory to give to her family. And, said things like, don't feel guilty if you have to X, Y, Z. And so it's really invaluable information for your family that can help, again, relieve guilt or the stress and burden of making difficult decisions, especially when dementia's progressed and you no longer can ask mom or dad or aunt, uncle, or whoever. And so this study, or this guide, is just meant to help walk you through some of those discussions. It's a little hard just to sit down and be like, hey mom, what are your end-of-life plans? What do you need? And you don't know what dimensions to talk about or different details. So this is just meant to help facilitate that difficult conversation. I'm pleased to let you know that we got funded from the Alzheimer's Association. We just found out on Friday to test this in community-based partners to see if it helps improve feelings of anxiety or stress, if it helps them feel like they can make decisions better, they feel more efficacious in doing that, and if it helps improve the relationship now that they had discussions about these tough topics, so we'll be starting that soon. I'm excited about it. Okay, so that is a quick overview of the lead guide. Questions, comments?
First of all, a couple months ago, you two, I guess, nurses or something come to my house, and they told me they was that hot, and that the veterans did not take care of it anymore, and that I was their baby, and that I was dying. I said, what the hell you mean I'm dying? I ain't dying. Well, see, about 3 years ago, they had sick a bone scan at me, and I had a shadow in my bone. I had cancer, and they said, I might pop, die. Well, I had radiology, and I got rid of it. And I don't know where they came up with the idea of dying. They didn't want them around, but they said they were gonna take me over. And I didn't have to think about it. I said, oh, yes, I said, just get out of here. I said, I don't want you. I said, I'm not dying, you know. I ain't ready to die.
Yeah.
For a while.
That's a tough conversation to have. I would encourage you to meet with your nurses or your doctor and have those tough conversations and clarify your questions.
You know, my daughter comes, and they give her a bunch of crap. She's a little hard to get along with.
Well, thank you for sharing. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
Could you include this into your will somehow?
Yeah, so the question was, can you include it in your will? So again, you should have some folder with all your important documents, like your will, your advance directive. You can include this in it. Yeah, that would be a great thing to include. But again, make sure you're not the only one that has the copy, that your family members or whoever is going to make those decisions for you, they have a copy too. Good question.
A few years ago, there was when I started buying, there were two directives, one from a state and another came later. I would recommend that everybody complete the latest form to make sure that it's correct. Is that correct? It hasn't been changed again, has it?
So the question was whether the advance directive form has been changed again. I don't believe it's been changed super recently, but you know what? You could ask the staff here to look it over and make sure you're on the correct form.
I feel confident that mine is correct, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah.
To make sure that there was an original one,
Mm-hmm.
and some people may not be.
That's great feedback. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, ask your physician or your nursing staff here, or to make sure that if you filled it out a while ago, make sure that it's on the right form and that it's current and legally binding. Good question. Yeah, Deborah.
Sure, just point out, that's a great question. And every state has a different form. So you want to make sure that you've got your advance directive completed on the correct form for the state that you're living in.
Yes, that's a very good point. So each state has their own form. So you got to make sure that if you moved here recently to Utah, but your old advance directives from Ohio, that you filled out a new form for the state you are living in.
So we build one out here in Utah, and live in that.
Yeah, so you need to fill out the form of where you're living to make it be legally accurate. Yeah. Good feedback.
I think your wills and things have to be updated every so often. I can't remember how many years, but don't wills have to be updated?
Ooh, that's a little out of my league. The question is about whether wills need to be updated. Not sure about that. Something to look into. And we actually have Dr. Deborah Scammon, if you want to come up. She's faculty here at the University of Utah.
I have a question, just real quick.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Morgan Norlin, the director here. If I did the will with the VA, does Avalon here have a copy of that? Just the VA would have a copy of that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They asked me for a copy of the directive for my husband when I brought
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, so the question was, if you completed your advanced directive or living will with the VA hospital, would it be here at the VA nursing home? Not necessarily. So if you probably want to make sure that you have a copy here. Okay. Oh, so come up, Dr. Scanlon. Dr. Scanlon's been doing some research on creating for those of you who are providing care for someone, providing a caregiver guide, and I'll let her talk about that briefly.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great presentation, and I'll have to say it was very meaningful to me for two reasons. Personally, I just went through the process of establishing an estate plan and a will, which I should have done years ago. But in the process, the attorney who was drafting the documents for me encouraged me to do these kinds of things. Get an advance directive in place, specify who my medical power of attorney was going to be to make decisions, and let that person know in advance and have these discussions in advance. So it was very meaningful for me in that way. And the second reason is I'm currently caring for my 94-year-old aunt who lives in Central California by herself, about 10 miles out of town, and the town is tiny. The hospital there has 9 beds. So she is in a very vulnerable situation, even though her highest preference and value is to remain independent and stay in her home as long as she possibly can, which puts a huge burden on me as her niece, being that many miles away and having to call her every night to hear her voice and see if I can detect anything has changed, to manage a set of caregivers who are there to help her make sure she has a nutritious meal at least once a day, make sure she gets through her medical appointments. That's all very stressful. And that is really the reason I got involved in the project I'm involved with. And I brought some copies of the caregiver guide that we have written as part of our project. Our project is slightly different in that our purpose was to try to figure out things that would make sense and make it more feasible and easier for both primary care providers, the doctors that you see in the community, and your family caregivers to share the burden of taking care of you, so that they could communicate with each other better, so that they could know both what the patient and what the caregiver's values and preferences were. So that's what motivated us to write this guide. As I said, I have a few copies. I didn't expect quite this big an audience, so I didn't bring them for everybody, but I also brought a flyer, and inside the flyer is our website where you can download an electronic copy if you care to have one, and I don't have enough copies for you. But I'm rambling, but I apologize for that. Can I just ask, how many of you are caring for somebody, family member or a close friend or a neighbor in any way that you're taking them to appointments, taking them food, helping them do their laundry? Few of you. How many of you have family caregivers, family members who are helping with your care? Okay, we hope that these guides will be useful in both situations, both for those who are providing care and those who are receiving care, so that they can have these kinds of conversations with their family members and make sure that everybody is in the loop about what happens. Just to go back to something Kara said, the location of somebody's passing is something that you often forget to talk about. With the case of my aunt, she was seriously ill, was in the hospital. We brought her home. She got better, but she wasn't well, and there was the possibility that she would go back to the hospital. I never had that conversation with her. I didn't know whether she would prefer to die at home, where she felt comfortable and in a familiar environment, or whether she would feel safer if she were in the hospital and would prefer to pass there if it came to that. So having those kinds of conversations, you put them off because they're difficult conversations, but they are very important conversations for everybody's benefit. I saw a hand up. Could I answer a question? No, sorry, I thought I saw him. I'm happy to answer any questions about family caregiving. And I'm also happy to have a box back there after the session is over. If you care to stop by and get one, I'll be glad to. Thank you.
Okay, well, I want to thank the VA Nursing Home here for having us. We really appreciate you collaborating with us on this, our Utah Geriatric Education Consortium, and we're happy to come back. So let Brooke know, I think would be the best point person if you have topics that you're interested in having one of our faculty members come talk about. We're here to help provide free education and resources. So I also have if you want to advance the slide, Jackie, my email's up there. If you want to email me with any questions, I'm happy to answer those. So thank you for being here.
You said with this at
yes.
the beginning, you're putting out more information on this. Was that my understanding?
Oh, we have on that website, we have information about a variety of topics. This is, the lead guide is on there, but we have the guide that Dr. Scammon put out is on there as well. We have resources on other topics. These sessions are recorded, and you can go on and you can find recordings about different topics. And we just had someone talk about urinary incontinence, right, at one of our sessions, and that's recorded. You can go on there and learn about it. We also have a best practice in long-term care for people with dementia. There's a 3-hour module. It's online. It's free. You get a certificate of completion. This is great for staff members to complete as part of their dementia training, and that is also found on that website, and that was developed by our faculty. So, yes.
Does the University of Utah have any what do I want to call it? Get-togethers for people that have a spouse that has dementia?
That's a great question. The question was, are there any support groups or get-togethers? So we do. Great questions. We do partner with the Utah chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. They're located down in Draper, and they have support groups all over the area. So I would encourage you to reach out to them for support groups. Those are a wonderful resource to be able to bounce ideas off of other caregivers in a similar situation, get support,
We also
feedback.
have a 1-800 number that you can call 24 hours a day. And so if you had a problem come up at 2 in the morning, you could call and they would answer your question if you had a spouse or a family member, a loved one that needed to be.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. The Alzheimer's Association does have a 1-800 24-hour support line. I remember hearing from one of my research participants that he called that number on a Sunday morning because he had no idea how to put pantyhose on his wife. He's like, I don't know what to do here. Like, help me through this. And they helped him. Like, okay, you bunch it up and then you roll it. Like, they will help you with anything, any time of day. So that's a great resource.
Here as well.
Oh, you do? Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I can't remember when it is.
There's a support group here.
First Wednesday at 2 o'clock.
Well, there we go.
Oh, first Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Here, is that only for family members of residents here or open to the community? Okay, first Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. Yeah, that's great. And also, Dr. Linda Edelman's in the back. She's the head of the UGEC, the Utah Education Geriatric Consortium back there. So if you have other questions about other parts of this grant outside of the Alzheimer's and dementia education piece, feel free to chat with her. Well, there are refreshments in the back. Thank you all for providing those. Oh, yes, sorry, I'm getting flags in the back. We do have some paper, just really brief surveys. If you don't mind filling out, our Nancy and Cindy are gonna walk around with those because we are a federally funded grant. They like us to collect data on who comes to these talks, and so it's completely anonymous. It's used for our data reporting, but it's really beneficial to us. If you don't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out, that would be very helpful. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glad you're asking because your questions in the back of this
I think with you that offered copies in the beginning, I wonder if I could have 2 more now that I said no, I don't need one.
Yeah, no, let me get that for you.
I don't have that.
I'll let you be first for you. If you can grab one real quick.
I'll go grab one of mine.
May I share these right here?
And then I can just get a few So I will give that to our administrator in our group. Yeah, and yeah, if you were.
That was different.
Yeah, just one of you guys maybe can
Happy to share her, she's trying to get the word out about her, okay? Yeah, thank you. Yes. Right, yeah. Did you grab one?
No, but are there enough? Because I don't want to take mine and somebody else.
Well, there is a Parkinson's dementia where further along in the disease course they can get a dementia. It doesn't get better, right? There's to get as much feedback from her as you can. Yeah. Right. We all know that.
That's awesome. Okay.
Later stages.
I think it's going to be our little place in the beach.
So, okay, good.
She doesn't have a dementia, but yeah. Maybe someday you want to raise the position, like I've noticed these behaviors, I don't know if she's having any thinking. Maybe a situation where you need a medical power, maybe medical power of attorney until she, so then you have to prove that she's incompetent, you get power of attorney and you'd be a good resource at least to say, hey, you know, have this. Talk about different milestones. I'm sorry to hear how it goes.